Today we're diving into some of the most broken metas Valorant has seen since its launch, but instead of just talking about them, let me show you what we'll be looking at. From agents that dominated the rank ladder to strategies that flipped the pro scene on its head, we're going to take a trip down memory lane. So this video is easier to follow, I'll be breaking these down in chronological order, patch by patch, focusing on the things that became so broken the devs had to step in. One example of this can be found all the way back in beta before Valorant even officially released, and that was Raze. It was obviously early days for Valorant, so I'm almost hesitant to call it a meta per se, but I can't make a video like this without mentioning how strong she was. The main thing that made Raze so good back then was the fact that she had 2 grenades. The second one did cost 200 credits, but still, having 2 to throw at practically the same time was obviously overpowered. Before I continue about Raze and Valorant's broken metas in general, let me ask you something. How long have you spent playing Valorant? For some of you, the answer is probably hundreds if not thousands of hours. Now imagine those hours rewarded you with Valorant points. Well, that's what's possible with today's sponsor, Buff. It's a free program that works while you're playing your favorite games, and they support things like Valorant, League, as well as countless other titles. All you need to do is download Buff, let it run in the background as you play, and just like that you'll start earning Buff points. These can be used in the marketplace to purchase things like Riot gift cards, Steam vouchers, or even just gaming gear in general. Buff is partnered with Overwolf, so it's safe to use. It won't hog resources or slow down your PC, and even has over 15 million users. Since you're already playing games anyway, why not earn some free rewards while you're at it? If you sign up for Buff today using my link in the description, you'll even receive some bonus points to help you get started. On top of that, if you comment #downloadedbuff and your Buff username on this video, I'll choose a few of you to get an additional 400 Buff points. So what are you waiting for? Get started with Buff today using the link down below. As I was saying, the double paint shells were pretty overtuned, and thankfully this was nerfed in patch 0.47. The kill reset was added to the paint shells, so you would need to get 2 kills in a round to then refresh a charge of this ability. You might recall Raze receiving a few more nerfs over the years though, so as much as the double grenade was the focus point, here are some of the other crazy stats Raze had back in the beta. The paint shells actually dealt more damage and had a wider range on said damage originally. Those values on screen were in the game until patch 7.9. What's more is that tagging used to be even slower in Valorant. This made Raze's paint shells especially deadly because if the first grenade hit you, your movement speed would be pretty drastically reduced, and chances are the remaining explosions would hit you too. It didn't stop there though, as her blast packs were much stronger. Not only do we disregard all the recent nerfs to mobility, they were also cheaper at 100 credits each. They dealt more damage and had double the radius on said damage. Then you wouldn't need to worry about the arming time or anything either, because as soon as you threw out the satchel, it'd be ready to deal damage. I will point out they did deal damage to allies at the time, but that's only a slight drawback compared to everything else. The Terror continued with her boombot. In beta, it was only 200 credits, and it dealt a maximum of 125 damage, meaning it would one-shot players on pistol rounds. It used to be harder to break with 100 health, and it even cleared more space with twice the duration compared to what it currently has. Even her ultimate was stronger back then. Its cost was only 6 ultimate points, and it equipped even faster than it does now. All of those factors in her kit made Raze an instant must pick in the beta, and just a clear case of something in Valorant being simply broken. I mean, even nowadays Raze is a popular pick. Imagine if you dropped beta Raze into the current state of the game, you wouldn't see anything else played. Another monster early on in Valorant's meta was Jett. Even today she's a community favorite, but her current state pales in comparison to what she used to be able to do. You all would have seen those Korean Jett clips, where the right click kills reset her ultimate. Jett players simply ran through the enemy team and mowed them down, but there was even more to her kit than that. Between the official launch of the game and patch 2.1, there was a roughly 6-month window where Jett smokes lasted 7 seconds each. She was practically a controller at that point, and don't forget she even had 3 charges of Cloudburst at the time. Also, for some reason her abilities were insanely affordable. Not only were the smokes 100 credits each, but the updrafts were the same price. And yes, that was updrafts plural, because in case you forgot, Jett originally had 2 updrafts. There was even a time when Jett's dash didn't need to be activated, so it was always ready for you to dash away at a moment's notice. On top of that, for the entirety of episode 1 and episode 2, Jett could dash through Cypher's trapwires to destroy them. How broken would that be today? That just leaves us with her ultimate to talk about, and even beyond the right click refresh, Bladestorm used to cost 6 points, which is absurd. Even though all those clips you're seeing are just ranked highlights, it'd be ignorant to not talk about her pick rates in pro play. She had an 80% pick rate or higher at all 3 international tournaments for 2021. That's higher even than peak chamber meta, as you'll see later in this video. If it wasn't for Raze, I'd say this version of Jett was the strongest any individual Valorant agent has been. If you reverted, just 1 or 2 of those nerfs today should be too strong, let alone if she came back in her prime. She'd single-handedly dictate every match, and your team simply wouldn't be competitive if it didn't include a Jett. It's not just agents though, as weapons have had their time to shine as well. The Bucky is one such example, and there are sort of 2 parts to this. The first being that up until patch 1.6, all shotguns were more accurate in the air. You would just run around jumping at people as if you're playing Fortnite, and this was especially prevalent on Jett, since you could updraft first, then utilize the low spread penalty while in the air. What everyone probably remembers more though is that even after that was nerfed, the range on the Bucky was still insane, all the way until patch 2.6. Prior to then, the Bucky still had 15 pellets on the right click, so it was entirely possible to just one-tap people from obscene distances as if you were using a sniper. It was one of those cases where it was insanely fun to be using the Bucky and running around without a care in the world, but there was almost no counterplay for the other team, which would end up being frustrating. Another gun that was far too strong for a while was the Frenzy. Its time to shine was up until patch 2.3, as before then it only set you back 400 credits. That meant it was possible to buy both a Frenzy and light armor and pistol rounds, so it was a substantial advantage over Ghost users as you'd be protected from a headshot. What's more is that the Frenzy used to be even more catered towards the running gun demons. While walking, it used to be 4 times as accurate, and it was twice as accurate while running compared to now. Since then, we've had even further nerfs to the spread and recoil of this pistol, so you can imagine how broken it used to be. Up next is Astra, and her release was a strategic revolution for Valorant, especially in pro play where her ability to control the entire map was unmatched. She was at her strongest immediately after being released, but it took a little while for her to catch on and dominate pro play. Let's take a look at what made Astra so broken. For starters, she did have 5 stars back then, and it received 2 per round rather than 1 per round. Despite the fact that Astra got her 5th star back recently, she's still a shell of her former self, and that's all due to the cooldowns. The cooldown on recalling a star was only 8 seconds when Astra released. That's over 3 times less than it is now, giving her the ability to constantly reposition utility with minimal windows for the enemy to punish her. Then the same thing goes for the cooldown of her smoke. That used to only be 14 seconds, so the charges would replenish at the same rate the smokes actually lasted on the map. The craziest cooldown was on her stun and suck though, which both only had a 12-second cooldown when she released, but now they're almost 4 times longer at 45 seconds. The gravity whirl in particular used to be broken as it covered a larger area and activated faster. Astra's presence in pro play peaked in 2021 as teams heavily relied on her flexibility to both set up execute and stall pushes, all while controlling the entire map. This was one of the slowest metas in the game due to her playstyle, but her skill ceiling meant that this was one of those metas that was more noticeable in pro play without having as much of an impact on the lower ranks. The same can't be said for this next meta though, as in January 2022, Episode 4 Act 1 released. Alongside a new agent in Neon, Valorant wanted to rebalance some of the cheaper guns, so the Spectre, Ares, Guardian and Bulldog all received some changes. I don't think anyone expected the Ares to take ranks by storm like it did. The 2 buffs it received included removing the spin up time and increasing the fire rate by 30%. For a grueling 8 days, people would be buying this thing over a Vandal and Phantom at times, and in ranked all you'd hear is Ares spam from every corner of the map. The gun was simply overwhelming, almost impossible to counter unless you yourself were using an Ares. This prompted one of the fastest nerfs I think we've ever seen in Valorant history, as literally the next week the devs increased the price, spread and recoil, sending the Ares back to its niche status. When you think of broken metas in Valorant, Chamber is the first character that comes to mind. He released at the end of 2021 in the off-season, so didn't immediately make waves in the pro scene, but he absolutely took ranked by storm. Launch Chamber's trademark was busted compared to the ability we know today. It was cheaper at only 150 credits, and he had 2 of them to watch multiple checkpoints. Not only that, but they had infinite range similar to Cypher strips, and the slow from one of those bad boys lasted for almost 10 seconds. Then his ultimate was insane as well. The fire rate was 1.2, which happens to be right in the middle of the Marshall and where his ultimate is currently at. Tour de Force used to cost only 7 ultimate points, and just like the trademark, it left a slow field that lasted 9.5 seconds. What really defined Chamber's strength though was his rendezvous. Originally, between the 2 anchors, he could teleport upwards of 35 meters. Compare that to today, where even after the recent buffs, he can only travel 18 meters. At the first international tournament of 2022, the first one after he released, Chamber was sitting at a respectable 44% pick rate. He then got nerfed, with the trademark having a cost increase and the charges going from 2 down to 1. Despite that nerf, at the next international tournament, he blew all the other agents out of the way with an insane 77% pick rate. This prompted a much bigger nerf in patch 5.3. You can see just how hard he was hit there. You've got ultimate points increased, slows decreased, costs and cooldowns increased. People thought this was finally the end of his reign. But no, despite all those changes, at Champions 2022, he still had a 67% pick rate. That prompted a further nerf, in fact you'd probably call it a rework to chamber in patch 5.12. This is where we saw the rendezvous change from 2 anchors down to 1, as well as massive nerfs to his ultimate. This effectively gutted him, and by the time the next international tournament came around, he only had a 3% pick rate. Chamber's rule over the Valorant meta is iconic. He could take so much space aggressively on defense, practically risk-free, and the get out of jail free card in the rendezvous is the pivotal reason why the Chamber meta will go down as one of the most broken metas ever. Next, we need to talk about the Stinger, and it's worth noting it had its little run amidst all the Chamber nerfs during 2022. Before patch 5.6, it was already silently performing quite well, with some pro teams opting to fully force rounds and buy up Stingers. It's sort of funny to me because back then I actually made a video talking about how the Stinger meta was back, why it was too good for its price point, and showing these unusual strategies pros were going for with it. For example, even after losing the pistol round, teams liked their chances of winning rounds 2 and 3 using the Stinger, so they'd buy them. Then a few days after that video, this weapon actually got buffed. They made the gun less random when fully spraying, as well as less random on the first shot accuracy for aiming down sights. The Stinger definitely wasn't as oppressive as some of the other metas I've gone over in this video, but I still decided it was worth talking about. As a direct result of those buffs, it became normal for pro teams to force buy Stingers and full shields in situations where you'd otherwise expect them to be saving. The Stinger stayed like that for a little over 4 months before they eventually increased the price to make that strategy less viable and also decreased the damage it did at longer ranges. Now we finally come to Viper, who has had a rollercoaster ride when it comes to her relevance in the meta. When Valorant first came out, she was by far the worst agent. They needed buffs upon buffs for her to see any sort of play. To give you an idea of just how bad Viper was back then, she started the round with only 50 fuel, the decay effect was applied to her allies as well, and the snakebite didn't even apply the vulnerable effect. She was so awful. From the beta until almost a year after the official launch, they tried various things to make Viper at least a viable pick. They made her molly bigger and of course applied the vulnerable effect, increased how long she could spend outside her ultimate, increased the amount of decay and how long it lasted for, and then finally in patch 2.6, they made her decay instantly deal a higher amount of damage upon initial contact. Well, it turns out that all those buffs ended up being overtuned. Once pro teams caught on to the idea of using her in double controller team comps, the ball was already rolling and it was too late. It was almost a similar situation to Chamber, in the sense that the devs could tell the agent was too strong and were slowly chipping away at their kit, but pro teams were learning faster than those nerfs came into play. Even though the agent was technically becoming worse and worse as the patches went by, their pick rate would still go up. It's not like the Viper or double controller meta came out of nowhere, it was lurking in the background for years, and in fact Viper probably had more impact on Valorant's meta than any other singular agent. She definitely didn't have the flashiest highlights or most exciting playstyle, but she filled a role that no one else could. What made Viper so good was definitely a few things, but a lot of it came down to stalling the enemies, as she's this sort of controller and sentinel hybrid, the way she stops the enemies from getting on sight. No other smoke in the game is scary like a Viper smoke, which immediately takes away some of your health when you walk through it. Then you had her snakebite, which for the longest time had a combined duration of 11 seconds between the 2 charges. Her overall coverage and uptime was just insane too. Like sure, Astra is actually the one with global range, but Viper's wall is a must on bigger maps like Icebox or Breeze, and in general her fuel system allowed her to keep smokes up more consistently throughout the rounds compared to the other agents. See, Viper was actually at her most played in March of 2024, where at Masters Madrid she had a whopping 78% pick rate. What's noteworthy about that is there was actually a completely unnoticed nerf to Viper, where apparently her smokes had reduced duration for around 5 months, and even with that, she dominated the meta and no one noticed she was bugged. The latest nerf did finally seem to do some damage to Viper, as a lot of her flexibility was taken away once she could no longer pick up that poison orb. The snakebite going from 2 charges down to 1 helped that as well, and we've finally seen a slight decrease in her relevancy. Still, despite seemingly being on a downwards trend, she had a 50% pick rate at Champions, so the 3rd highest in the game. To add another layer of complexity to this Viper situation, she was never that dominant in ranked. Your average players simply lacked the synergy and timings to make the most out of her kit, so Riot were probably hesitant to nerf her into the ground in fear of making her redundant in ranked. That brings us to the most recent, albeit short-lived meta, with ISO. Initially, he was one of the more underwhelming releases in Valorant history. As the devs put it, he was underperforming across all skill brackets. That remains true even after receiving a number of small buffs, so in June 2024, they went a more drastic route and sort of reworked his double tap. Originally, this ability only granted ISO a shield after he got a kill and shot an orb. In patch 8.11, they made it so he immediately got this shield, only having to do a small animation. They did try and balance this by ensuring it made a sound so enemies knew the shield was there, and even reduced the charges from 2 down to 1, but this still proved to be far too strong. For 2 weeks, the sound of an ISO activating his shield was the scariest thing imaginable, until patch 9, where they almost halved the duration of double tap and removed the ability to get a second charge of it via kill reset. So those were some of the most broken metas in Valorant's history for both pro play and the rank ladder. There were a few honorable mentions like when Sage used to be busted or Cypher right after they buffed his trip last year, but I think the examples I went over in this video had a little more impact. Regardless, let me know what you think was the most broken meta in Valorant's history, as well as what meta you think might be up next.